1730. She built it from nothing. 18 months of silence, data, and sleepless nights. Then one morning, someone else's name was on the cover page. She didn't scream. She didn't quit. She just opened her laptop and typed one very quiet, very precise email. The office smelled like burnt coffee and quiet ambition, that particular mix that fills every open plan workspace where people pretend to collaborate while carefully guarding their ideas, like medieval knights protecting a castle with a polite smile instead of a sword. Mara Voss had been at Crestline Financial for 3 years. Not a short time. Long enough to know which printer jammed on Tuesdays, which meeting rooms had broken AC, and, most importantly, which people smiled at you in the hallway while already thinking about how to use you. She had learned to read the room. She just hadn't expected the room to be that bold. It started, as most catastrophes do, on an ordinary Monday. The sky outside the glass walls of the 32nd floor was the color of old pewter, clouds moving slowly like they had nowhere urgent to be. Mara arrived at 8:14, 6 minutes earlier than required, a habit she'd kept since her first week. She set her tote bag on her chair, plugged in her laptop, and reached for her coffee. The real one from the small Italian place 2 blocks down, not the office sludge, and opened her email. The first message in her inbox had been sent at 7:53 a.m. subject line, Project Elevate. Final deck approved for board presentation. She clicked it without thinking much. A routine update, she assumed. Maybe a scheduling confirmation. She had been waiting for the board date to be locked in. Project Elevate was her submission for the company's internal innovation grant, a €200,000 fund awarded once a year to the employee with the strongest strategic proposal. Mara had spent 18 months on it. 18 months of evenings, weekends, spreadsheet versions numbered up to 34, a folder on her personal drive labeled simply E that had grown into something she was quietly, privately proud of. The email loaded. She read it once, then again. Then she set her coffee down very slowly, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped feeling like your own. The deck attached to the message, the one marked Final, Approved, Board Ready, listed the project lead as Daniel Rourke. Daniel Rourke, who had joined Crestline 8 months ago. Daniel Rourke, who sat 3 desks to her left, who wore expensive sneakers with cheap suits, who had a talent for appearing in conversations at precisely the right moment and saying the last sentence of an idea as if he'd been thinking it all along. Daniel Rourke, who had asked her, twice casually over lunch, to walk him through the logic of her proposal because he was curious about the methodology. She had walked him through it, both times. The ceiling lights hummed above her. Somewhere across the floor, a phone rang and went unanswered. Mara sat very still, the kind of stillness that isn't calm. It's the stillness of a person recalibrating, measuring the distance between what they expected and what is actually in front of them. She opened the attached deck. Slide 1. Project Elevate. A strategic framework for operational efficiency and market repositioning. Her framework. Her exact phrasing, down to the hyphenated subtitle she'd revised 4 times before settling on that version. Slide 2. The executive summary. Her words. Restructured slightly, a few synonyms swapped, one paragraph shuffled to a different position. The kind of edits that take 20 minutes and feel like they constitute authorship. Slide 7. The data model she'd built using 3 external sources she'd had to license personally through her own account because the company's data budget hadn't covered them. Her model. With the licensing footnotes removed. Slide 11. The risk matrix. The one she'd stayed until 11 p.m. on a Thursday to complete, cross-referencing regulatory frameworks across 4 jurisdictions. The one she'd emailed to her personal address when she finished, just because she wanted a copy outside the company server, just in case. She closed the deck. She opened her desk drawer and took out a small notebook, paper, not digital, a habit she'd picked up from a mentor years ago who told her, write things down on paper. Screens lie about timestamps. Paper doesn't. She uncapped her pen. She wrote the date and time at the top of a fresh page. Then she wrote, document everything. Because Mara Voss had grown up watching her mother fight a workplace dispute for 2 years. A long, exhausting battle that her mother had eventually won, but only because she'd kept every receipt, every email printout, every handwritten note. Her mother had told her once, very quietly over dinner, "They always think you'll forget. They rely on you forgetting." Mara did not forget. She spent the next 40 minutes doing something that looked, to anyone watching, like completely normal desk work. She was typing, scrolling, occasionally leaning back in her chair with the mild, unfocused expression of someone reviewing routine files. What she was actually doing was building a timeline. Every email she had sent related to Project Elevate, every document with a creation timestamp, every version in the company's shared drive with metadata intact. The two licensing confirmation emails from the external data provider sent to her personal account showing the purchase date, it's 14 months ago, under her name, paid from her personal card. She had something Daniel Rourke did not: a paper trail so clean it practically had a watermark. By 9:30 a.m., the office had filled up around her. The noise of a regular Monday, keyboards, low conversations, the distant percussion of someone's shoes on the wooden floor near the kitchen, rose and settled into its usual rhythm. Daniel arrived at 9:44. She heard him before she saw him, his voice carrying easily, that particular tone people use when they want to be overheard being important. "Yeah, the board presentation is Thursday," he was saying into his phone as he walked past her desk. He didn't look at her. "No, the deck's already approved. We're good." "We?" Mara looked up from her screen, watched him settle into his chair 3 desks away, toss his jacket over the back of it, open his laptop with the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who believed the ground beneath him was solid. She looked back at her notebook, underlined the date. There are moments in life when rage is the obvious response, hot, visible, loud. And there are moments when rage is a luxury you cannot afford because the only currency that actually buys you anything in a room like this one is precision. Mara was not cold. She was not unaffected. There was something tightening in her chest that she recognized as the particular fury of watching something you built get handed to someone else with a bow on it. But she had her mother's instincts. And her mother had taught her that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. She turned back to her screen, opened a new document, began composing a list. What she needed, what she had, what she was going to do. The third item on the list was 3 words long. She didn't write them yet, but she already knew what they were. The next 48 hours moved the way time moves when you're carrying a secret. Slower than normal, heavier, each hour pressing down with a weight that has no name but sits exactly behind the sternum. Mara did not confront Daniel. She did not forward the deck to HR with a furious cover note. She did not pull her manager aside and whisper the word plagiarism in the kitchen over reheated lunch. Every instinct that lives in the part of the brain built for fairness screamed at her to do exactly those things. She quieted that part, methodically, the way you turn down a dial, not with force, but with patience. She watched instead. Watching, she had discovered over 3 years at Crestline, was an underrated skill in an office where everyone was too busy performing competence to actually observe anything. People talked too much. They emailed when they should have listened. They announced when they should have noted. Mara watched, and what she saw over those 2 days was illuminating in the way that things are illuminating when you already suspected the shape of the truth, and now it's standing in full light with no shadows left to hide in. Daniel Rourke was being congratulated. Not quietly, not in passing. Openly, warmly. The kind of congratulations that come with a hand on the shoulder and a tone that implies we always knew you had it in you. The head of strategy, Marcus Fell, stopped by Daniel's desk on Tuesday morning and said something that made Daniel laugh and lean back in his chair with the easy expansiveness of a man receiving his due. 2 of the senior associates sent reply-alls to the approval email with phrases like "brilliant work" and "can't wait to see this land with the board." Nobody had said a word to Mara. She sat 3 desks away and processed each of these moments with the careful neutrality of a scientist recording data points. She added them to her notebook. Date, time. Who said what to whom? The notebook was filling up in a way that would have looked, to any outside observer, like aggressive meeting prep. What it actually was was evidence architecture. On Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. Mara was in one of the glass-walled meeting rooms, the small one on the east side, the one everyone called the fishbowl because you could see in from three angles, reviewing a separate project when her manager, Claire Anderson, knocked and entered with the particular expression of someone delivering news they find mildly uncomfortable. Claire was not a bad person. Mara had always thought that about her. Not bad, just constitutionally conflict averse, the kind of manager who kept everything smooth on the surface because she couldn't bear the texture of what was underneath. She sat down across from Mara, set her hands flat on the table in the unconscious gesture of someone seeking stability. I wanted to check in, Claire said, about Elevate. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Mara watched the ripples. Of course, and she said. Her voice was pleasant, measured. A closed door with a polished handle. Claire glanced briefly toward the glass wall, then back. I know you were involved in the early research phase. I wanted to make sure you felt acknowledged in the process. Involved in the early research phase. 18 months. 2 licensed external datasets purchased on her personal card. 34 versions of a strategic deck. The risk matrix built alone on a Thursday night at 11 p.m. Involved in the early research phase. Mara let the silence sit for exactly 2 seconds before she smiled. Not a cold smile. Not a bitter one. A perfectly calibrated smile. The kind that communicates absolutely nothing while appearing to communicate warmth. I appreciate you saying that, Claire, she said. I've actually been compiling some documentation. Version histories, email records, the original data licensing confirmations, just for my own records. It's good practice, I think. Something moved behind Claire's eyes. The faintest adjustment. The kind that happens when the brain registers information it wasn't expecting and has not yet decided what to do with it. Of course, Claire said. Very thorough. A pause. Is there anything you wanted to flag? Not yet, Mara said. Not yet. 2 of the most precise words in the English language when deployed correctly. Claire left 4 minutes later. Mara stayed in the fishbowl for a moment longer, looking out at the floor through the glass, at the desks, the moving figures, the screens glowing blue-white in the gray afternoon light. The city stretched out behind the windows, indifferent and enormous. 32 floors below, people were walking fast along the pavement, umbrellas tilting against a thin rain, none of them aware that in a glass box in the sky, a very quiet reckoning was taking shape. She opened her laptop and began a new search. Not internal, not company systems. A clean browser tab, her personal data connection through her phone, a habit she'd started when she began building Project Elevate and wanted to keep her research separate from anything that touched the company server. She typed slowly and deliberately, the way you type when the words matter. Regulatory requirements, financial services, authorship attribution, intellectual property, internal grant fraud. The results populated. She read carefully, without hurrying. There was a particular body in the EU financial services space. She was already familiar with its name, had referenced its compliance frameworks in slide 11 of the deck that now bore someone else's name, that had, in the last 18 months, expanded its scope to include internal governance and ethical conduct at regulated entities. Not just market behavior, internal conduct. The treatment of intellectual contributions, the accuracy of authorship in formal submissions. A regulated financial services firm presenting work to its board under a false name wasn't merely an HR matter. It was a compliance matter. Mara sat back. The rain had thickened outside. The glass was starting to catch it in long diagonal lines, each drop tracing a slow, crooked path downward as if thinking carefully about where to land. She thought about her mother, about a drawer full of receipts that had eventually become the foundation of a case that no one had believed would go anywhere, about the particular patience required to let something build until it can no longer be ignored. She thought about slide 11, the risk matrix, the regulatory framework she had personally cross-referenced across 4 jurisdictions. The irony of it was almost too neat. The very section of the deck that demonstrated the most rigorous regulatory knowledge had been submitted under a name that belonged to someone who had never once, in 8 months at Crestline, attended a compliance training voluntarily. She opened a new document. She began to write. Not a complaint to HR, not a message to Claire, not a reply, all to the congratulatory email thread that had excluded her name entirely. A letter, precise, factual, unemotional, and addressed to the regulatory body whose logo appeared, with attribution correctly as she had originally written it, in a footnote on slide 11 of a deck that was now being prepared for a board presentation on Thursday. She did not finish it that night. She had learned from her mother that the first draft of something important should never be sent. You write it, let it cool, read it again. Look for emotion dressed as fact. Remove it. Look for fact dressed as accusation. Clarify it. What remains, if you've done it right, is simply the record, clean and exact and entirely undeniable. She saved the document to her personal drive, closed her laptop, picked up her real coffee, long cold now, and finished it anyway, looking out at the rain and the city and the quiet, irreversible momentum of what she had already set in motion. Thursday was 2 days away. She had one more thing to verify before she sent anything. One detail that would make the letter not just credible, but airtight. And she already knew exactly where to find it. Mara has the paper trail, the timestamps, and the regulatory body's name written at the top of a draft no one at Crestline has seen yet. Follow the story to find out what one email does to a board presentation, a career, and a very expensive pair of sneakers. Like and follow so you don't miss Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Thursday arrived the way important days always do, unremarkably, dressed in the same gray light as every other morning, offering no signal that anything was about to crack open. Mara was at her desk by 8:07. She had slept 6 hours, which was enough. She had reviewed the letter 3 times the night before, once at 9 p.m., once at 11, once just after midnight when she woke up and lay still in the dark and decided to read it one more time on her phone just to be certain. Each time it had said the same thing. Each time it had been exactly right. She had sent it at 12:17 a.m., not impulsively, not in anger. She had simply reached the point. After 2 readings, after the verification she'd completed on Wednesday evening, after confirming the one detail that had taken her 3 hours to locate and another hour to document properly, where there was nothing left to check. The letter was complete. The evidence was attached. The address was correct. She pressed send the way you press send on something that cannot be unsent, which is to say, with the quiet, steady awareness that the world on the other side of that action is a different world from the one you're currently sitting in. Then she put her phone face down on the nightstand and went back to sleep. The morning moved around her normally. Coffee, commute, the elevator with the slow closing doors, the 32nd floor arriving with its usual exhalation of recycled air and low-grade ambition. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She began working on a separate project, a real one, with her name already attached, the kind of routine deliverable that exists in every office and asks nothing of you emotionally. At 9:51, Daniel arrived. Jacket, expensive sneakers, the walk of a man who believed Thursday was going to be a very good day for him. He opened his laptop, checked something, and smiled at his screen. The private, satisfied smile of a person reviewing their own reflection and finding it acceptable. Mara looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked back at her work. At 10:30, the board prep meeting began in the large conference room on the eastern side of the floor, the one with the long table and the view that made people feel important. Mara was not invited. She had not expected to be. She watched Daniel walk in with Marcus Fell, the two of them carrying the easy, synchronized energy of people who believe they are moving toward a win. She noted the time in her notebook. What happened inside that meeting room over the next 40 minutes, Mara would only learn in fragments. A piece from a conversation she wasn't meant to overhear, a piece from a colleague who later described the atmosphere with the careful vagueness of someone who had witnessed something they weren't sure how to characterize, a piece from the expression on Marcus Fell's face when he came out. Marcus Fell had the face of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. Wide forehead, The kind of stillness that reads as authority until it reads as something else entirely. When he came out of the conference room at 11:14, his face had a quality she had never seen on it before, a subtle but unmistakable blankness, the expression of someone who has just received information that requires the complete temporary suspension of their public persona while the internal machinery recalibrates. He walked directly to his office, closed the door. Daniel came out 3 minutes later. He walked differently. It was a small difference, almost imperceptible. But Mara had spent 2 days watching him move through this office with the confidence of a man who had already won, and she knew the exact texture of that walk. This was not that walk. This was the walk of a man who has just been asked a question he did not have an answer to, and who is now calculating very rapidly what that means. He sat down at his desk, did not open his laptop immediately, stared at the middle distance for a moment that lasted slightly too long for a person who had nothing to worry about. Mara typed a sentence in her document, deleted it, typed it again. The regulatory body she had written to, whose name she had, with a precision that now felt almost architectural, included in the footnote of the very risk matrix that had been submitted under Daniel's name, operated with a response protocol she had researched carefully. They did not, as a rule, contact the submitting party directly on the day of receipt. They contacted the firm, through official channels, with a reference number and a request for documentation. She did not know exactly what had been received that morning, or precisely when, or by whom at Crestline. She did not need to know. She could read the room. She had always been able to read the room. At 11:47, Claire Anderson appeared at the edge of Mara's peripheral vision, walking toward her desk with a pace that was trying very hard to be casual and achieving something approximately 40% of the way there. "Mara," she said, "do you have a moment?" "Of course," Mara said. They went to the fishbowl again. The same small room, the same three-sided view, the rain from Tuesday gone now and replaced by a flat white sky that pressed against the glass with an almost domestic patience. Claire sat down. This time she did not put her hands flat on the table. She folded them in her lap, which was a different kind of signal entirely. "There's been a query," Claire said, "from an external body regarding Project Elevate." "I see," Mara said. "It references some questions around authorship, attribution." Claire paused. "Documentation." "That does sound significant," Mara said pleasantly. Another pause, longer this time. Outside the glass, the office moved in its usual rhythms. Screens, keyboards, the distant sound of someone's phone notification. The ordinary percussion of a place that did not yet fully understand that something inside it had shifted, quietly and permanently, sometime around 12:17 in the morning. "Mara." Claire's voice had dropped slightly, acquired a texture it hadn't had before. Not quite an apology, but the topsoil above one. "Is there something you wanted to tell me? Earlier you mentioned documentation." "I kept very thorough records," Mara said simply. "From the beginning. Version histories, email timestamps, the original data licensing confirmations. Those are under my name, by the way, purchased on my personal card 14 months ago. I have the receipts. I have the bank statement. I have 41 emails to my personal address with draft attachments going back to the project's origin date." She said it without heat, without triumph, with the same tone she might use to describe her filing system. Because it wasn't a speech, it wasn't a confrontation, it was simply a statement of what existed. Claire looked at her for a long moment, and in that look, beneath the discomfort, beneath the characteristic aversion to conflict, Mara saw something she hadn't expected quite so soon. Recognition, not of what had happened to Mara, that had always been known, she suspected, in the blurry, half-acknowledged way that comfortable people know things they prefer not to examine. What she saw was recognition of the situation Claire was now standing in, on the wrong side of, without a map. "I see," Claire said quietly. "I thought it was good practice," Mara said, "to keep records." She said it gently. She almost meant it kindly. The fishbowl was very quiet. 32 floors below, the city went about its enormous, indifferent business. Somewhere on the other side of the glass wall, Daniel Rourke was still sitting at his desk, still staring at the middle distance, still calculating. Mara picked up her notebook, uncapped her pen, wrote the time. The board presentation was still scheduled for Thursday afternoon. Whether it would happen as planned and under whose name was a question that Crestline Financial would spend the next several hours answering in rooms she was not in conversations she was not part of, with a growing awareness that the documentation trail they were about to audit led, with absolute clarity, in one direction only. There was still more to come. The board didn't yet know everything, and there was one person in that building who hadn't spoken yet. Someone who had been copied on an email 14 months ago, someone whose name appeared in a metadata field that nobody had thought to check. Not until now. Chapter 4. The person whose name appeared in the metadata field was named Celine Aiden. She worked on the fourth floor, compliance and regulatory affairs, a department that existed in that particular corporate limbo where everyone acknowledged its necessity and nobody wanted to think about it too closely, the way people feel about the structural beams in a building they live in. Celine was 38, quiet in the manner of people who have spent years being the one in the room who actually reads the documents everyone else only skims. She had a reputation for precision that some people found reassuring and others found mildly threatening, depending entirely on how much they had to hide. Mara had met her once, briefly, 14 months ago, at a cross-departmental workshop on regulatory frameworks that most attendees had treated as a compulsory inconvenience and Mara had treated as research. They had spoken for 11 minutes over coffee about the EU compliance expansion and what it would mean for internal reporting standards. Mara had found her sharp and direct and pleasantly uninterested in the kind of professional performance that consumed so much energy on the 32nd floor. At the end of that conversation, on a small professional instinct she couldn't fully articulate at the time, Mara had sent Celine an email. Not a formal one. A short note. Interesting conversation. I'm working on something that touches on the frameworks we discussed. I'll share a draft when it's further along. A thread opener. The kind of email that sits in an inbox doing nothing for months until one day it becomes the earliest timestamp in a chain of documented contact between two people. She had attached the first outline of Project Elevate, version 1, dated, under her name, with a subject line that contained the words Project Elevate. Early draft for your eyes only. Celine had replied within 2 days. Solid foundation. The risk matrix section will be the one to watch. Regulators are increasingly focused on cross-jurisdictional frameworks. Let me know if you want a compliance lens on it when you're further along. Mara had saved that email in 3 places. What Celine represented now was not just a witness. She was metadata made human. A compliance professional whose name appeared in the earliest documented exchange about a project that had just been submitted to a board under someone else's name in a regulated financial services firm that had received a query from a regulatory body that morning. The intersection of those facts was not a coincidence. It was architecture. And Mara had built it 14 months ago without fully knowing she was building it, operating on the instinct of a woman who had grown up watching her mother understand, viscerally, that the truth needs somewhere to live before it can protect you. She sent Celine a message at 12:04 p.m. Internal system, short, professional. Hi, Celine. I imagine you may be hearing some things today. I have documentation I'd like to share with you directly. Would you have 15 minutes this afternoon? The reply came in 4 minutes. I have 15 minutes at 3 p.m. Come to my office. The fourth floor was different from the 32nd, in the way that back offices are always different from front ones. Quieter, less performed, the lighting slightly less flattering, and somehow more honest for it. The carpet was older. The plants were real, not architectural. People walked here with the unhurried purposefulness of those who measure their days in things actually accomplished rather than things impressively presented. Celine's office was small and organized with a precision that felt personal rather than corporate. Bookshelves where things were actually arranged by subject, a desk where every document had a visible reason for being there. She was reading something when Mara knocked and entered, and she finished the paragraph before looking up. which Mara found immediately and completely trustworthy. Sit down, Selin said, not unkindly, just directly. Mara sat. She placed her folder on the table. Printed copies, because her mother's voice lived permanently in some back room of her mind, saying screens lie about timestamps, paper doesn't. And she slid it across without preamble. Selin opened it, read the first page, then the second. She turned pages the way careful readers do, without rushing, without performing reaction, her face doing the quiet internal work of a person cross-referencing what they're reading against what they already know. She reached the licensing confirmations, paused there slightly longer than elsewhere. Then she reached the metadata extract, a single page Mara had prepared on Wednesday evening, showing the file creation data from the original Project Elevate documents. Author field, creation date, last modified timestamps, the version history pulled from the company's shared drive before anyone had thought to look at it and consider what it showed. Selin looked at that page for a long time. You pulled the shared drive metadata yourself, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Wednesday, before the board prep meeting. Selin nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing information into an already active mental framework. And the regulatory submission? That was you. Yes. Another silence. Outside Selin's small window, fourth floor, facing the interior courtyard rather than the city, pigeons moved along a ledge with their characteristic combination of confidence and complete directionlessness. The building hummed its low institutional hum. I received something this morning, Selin said carefully. From the regulatory body. A documentation request. Reference number, formal headers, the works. She looked at Mara. They move fast when the submission includes compliance framework citations that they recognize as internally sourced. It suggests the submitting party has access to regulatory intelligence. They want to know where it came from. Slide 11, Mara said. The risk matrix. Yes. Celine's expression did something that wasn't quite a smile but existed in its general neighborhood, which I recognize incidentally because it draws on a cross-jurisdictional framework analysis that I contributed to internally 18 months ago, an analysis I shared with one person outside the compliance department. She paused. As a courtesy, during a conversation at a workshop. The room was very quiet. I never shared it with Daniel Rourke, Selin said. Plainly, as a statement of record. No, Mara said. You wouldn't have. There are moments in a long, careful effort when something clicks into place. Not dramatically, not with noise, but with the clean, almost inaudible precision of a lock cylinder finding its position. This was one of those moments. The kind where you feel, not triumph, but something quieter and more durable. The particular steadiness of standing on ground you built yourself, stone by stone, over 18 months, without anyone watching. Celine closed the folder, set her hands on top of it, looked at Mara with the direct, undecorated attention of someone who has spent years in a profession where the truth has consequences and vagueness is a liability. I'll need to be involved in the firm's response to the regulatory query, she said. As the compliance lead, that's standard. I'll also need to provide a statement regarding the origins of the framework material used in slide 11. A pause. My statement will be accurate. I know it will, Mara said. There will be a process, Selin said. Internal review, possibly external. It won't be fast and it won't be comfortable. For anyone. She said this without softening it, which Mara appreciated more than she could easily express. I know, Mara said. Are you prepared for that? Mara thought about the notebook in her tote bag, now almost entirely full. The folder of printed documents. The personal drive with 41 emails and 34 versions and 2 licensing receipts. The bank statement with a charge from 14 months ago that had a project name in the reference field because she had typed it herself carefully when she set up the payment. She thought about her mother's drawer, about the patience required to let something build until it cannot be ignored. Yes, she said. Selin nodded, picked up her pen, opened a clean legal pad. Then let's start from the beginning, she said. Tell me everything. Outside, the afternoon was thinning into early evening, the flat white sky finally softening at its edges, the city below beginning the slow exhale of a day ending. On the 32nd floor, in rooms Mara was not in, conversations were happening. Careful, increasingly uncomfortable, with a quality of retrospective alarm that tends to emerge when people realize that the quiet person they forgot to watch had been watching everything all along. Mara sat in a small, honest office on the fourth floor and began, calmly and completely, to tell the truth. She had been waiting to do this for a long time. And the most interesting part? The part that would eventually make Marcus Fell go very still in a room full of lawyers. Hadn't even happened yet. Chapter 5. The internal review was announced on a Friday, 11 days after the board presentation that never happened. It came in the form of an email from the legal department, terse, institutional, written in the particular dialect of corporate language that uses many words to say very little while simultaneously implying everything. The subject line read, Project Elevate, formal review process, all relevant parties. The distribution list was short. Mara's name was on it. So was Daniel's. So was Marcus Fell's, which was the detail that rippled quietly through the 32nd floor by mid-morning, because Marcus Fell's name did not typically appear on review notices. Marcus Fell was the kind of person who initiated reviews, not the kind who received them. The office processed this information in the way offices process uncomfortable truths, through the mechanism of not quite discussing it. People spoke about other things with slightly more animation than usual. The kitchen was busier than normal at 10 a.m. Eye contact near the coffee machine had a studied casualness that fooled no one. Mara came in at 8:14, set her bag on her chair, plugged in her laptop. She had known the email was coming. Not the exact day, not the exact wording, but the shape of it. She had understood for 11 days that this was the direction of travel, as clearly as you understand the direction of a river by watching where the water moves. Salen had been precise about the timeline. Regulatory queries of this nature, in firms of Crestline's profile, triggered internal review obligations within 10 business days. It was not optional. It was not something the firm could quietly absorb and move past. It was, as Salen had said in her fourth floor office, with the particular flat clarity of a compliance professional stating a fact, a matter of record now. A matter of record. Mara had written that in her notebook that evening, underlined it twice. What had happened in the 11 days between the email she sent at 12:17 a.m. and this Friday morning was not a single dramatic event, but a series of small, compounding ones. The kind that don't announce themselves individually but accumulate into something irreversible. A request from legal for all documentation related to Project Elevate. A second request, 3 days later, specifically for version histories and metadata. A quiet conversation between Celine's department and the regulatory body that Mara knew about only because Celine sent her a brief professional message on day 6. Process is moving as expected. Your documentation has been noted as comprehensive. Comprehensive. She had read the word 3 times and then put her phone away and gone for a walk around the block in the cold evening air, not because she needed to think, but because she needed somewhere to put the feeling. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but something older and more complicated. The feeling of having done a thing correctly that you were never supposed to have needed to do. On day 8, Daniel Rourke had not come into the office. A diary blocker appeared on the shared calendar. WFH, focused work. On day 9, the same. On day 10, Claire Anderson had appeared at Mara's desk with an expression that had moved well past discomfort into something approaching genuine contrition, and had said, quietly, that she wanted to acknowledge she should have asked more questions earlier. Mara had looked at her for a moment, had decided that Claire was telling the truth as far as she understood it, and had said simply, "Thank you for saying that. Not more, not less." She was not interested in collecting apologies. She was interested in the record. The record by day 11 was extensive. The legal team had pulled the shared drive history and confirmed what the metadata showed. 34 versions of the Project Elevate deck, all created and modified under Mara's credentials. The first dating back 22 months from a folder she had created on her first day of dedicated work on the project. The licensing confirmations matched, the bank statement matched, the email chain with Celine, beginning 14 months ago with an early draft attachment under Mara's name, had been formally logged as part of the documentation package submitted to the regulatory body. Slide 11, the risk matrix, had been traced to its source with a precision that Mara suspected had been uncomfortable for several people to witness. The cross-jurisdictional framework it drew on was identified in Celine's compliance department records as an internal document shared with one external recipient, Mara Voss, by name, 14 months ago, for the purpose of an independent research project. The words independent research project appeared in the original email because Celine was the kind of person who wrote emails that said exactly what they meant. Daniel Rourke had not been able to produce a single piece of originating documentation, not a draft, not a note, not a timestamp that predated the versions in Mara's drive. His legal representative, the appearance of a legal representative being itself a clarifying signal about how seriously certain parties had begun to take the situation, had made 2 requests for additional time to gather materials. Both had been noted. Neither had produced anything. The board presentation had been postponed indefinitely. The grant committee had suspended its decision pending the review outcome. The 200,000 euros sat in a kind of institutional limbo that everyone understood was temporary. The review meeting itself took place on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the Friday email, in a room on the 14th floor that Mara had never been in before. Legal and governance, a floor with a different quality of quiet. The quiet of a place where consequences are measured carefully before being assigned. The table was longer than the fish bowls. The chairs were better. The view was of a different angle of the same gray city. Mara arrived with her folder, the printed copies, the notebook, her laptop for the digital versions. She set them on the table in front of her with the composed, unhurried manner of someone who has been ready for this moment for a long time and is simply, finally, here. There were 5 people across the table, 2 from legal, 1 from the regulatory response team, Selin, who nodded at Mara once, briefly, with the small, precise acknowledgement of a person who keeps their professional and human responses carefully calibrated, and a woman Mara didn't recognize, who was introduced as an external governance consultant, brought in when the regulatory query had escalated from initial inquiry to formal review status. Marcus Fell was not in the room. His absence was, in its own way, louder than his presence would have been. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Mara spoke clearly and chronologically the way she had practiced, not in rehearsed speeches, but in the habit of clarity she had built over months of documentation, the habit of saying what happened, when it happened, and how she knew. She answered questions without embellishment. When she didn't know something precisely, she said so. When she had evidence, she produced it. The external governance consultant, a woman in her 50s with the focused, unsentimental attention of someone who had sat in many rooms like this one and could read them accurately, asked Mara at one point why she had sent the regulatory submission before raising the matter internally. Mara considered the question for a moment. Because I understood what the documentation meant, she said. And I understood that once a formal submission is pending with a regulatory body, the internal record becomes a matter that the firm has to engage with seriously. I didn't believe an informal internal conversation would produce the same result. A pause. I wanted the result. The consultant looked at her steadily for a moment. Then she wrote something on the pad in front of her. Mara didn't ask what it was. The outcome came 5 weeks later, in a letter. Formal, on headed paper, with reference numbers and careful legal language that nevertheless managed, beneath its institutional surface, to be entirely clear. Project Elevate was formally attributed to Mara Voss. The record was corrected in the firm's internal systems, the board documentation, and the regulatory response file. The grant committee reconvened. 3 weeks after that, another letter arrived, shorter, on different headed paper with a number in it. 200,000 euros. Her name at the top. She read it at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand. The real one from the Italian place, brought home this time, because she had worked from home that day, and it had seemed somehow like the right kind of morning for that. Outside, the city was doing what the city always did, indifferent and continuous and entirely unaware that in a small kitchen on the fourth floor of a building, 2 kilometers from Crestline's offices, something had just arrived that had been earned over 22 months and won over 8. She read the number again. She thought about her mother, about the drawer of receipts, about the long particular patience of people who understand that the truth needs somewhere to live before it can protect you. She thought about a notebook, almost completely full of dates and times and quiet observations. She thought about one email, sent at 12:17 in the morning, to a regulatory body whose logo had appeared, correctly attributed, carefully cited, in a footnote on slide 11 of a deck that someone had believed they could put their name on and walk away. Mara set the letter on the table, picked up her coffee, looked out the window at the ordinary morning. Then she opened her laptop, created a new folder, and typed a name into it, Project 2. She had been thinking about it for a while. A new proposal, broader scope, longer horizon, more complex, the kind of thing that takes 2 years if you do it right. She had learned, recently and at considerable cost to her patients, how to do things right. She opened a blank document, typed the date at the top, force of habit, thought for a moment about the first line. Then she began. She built it from nothing. She documented everything. She sent one email. And in the end, the only thing that changed her name on that cover page was the truth.